Okay, it looks like I am live. I'm so glad to be bringing another installment of Lunch and Breathe back to LinkedIn. Um, I took a little break while I was getting the Peace Building Conspirators Facebook group up and running, but I'm so excited to be back. I love the idea of taking some time to collectively decide, let's breathe, let's think about what kind of people we want to be while we're at work. Let's take a moment to be still and to think about something that is meaningful and activate some of that curiosity part of our brains. So that's the goal of Lunch and Breathe, to take a mindful moment to think creatively about something that matters a lot if we want to be effective in our roles as empathetic leaders in the workplace. So today the topic is love. This is a word that I love. I love the word love. I'm a woman of faith, and I pray daily to be, not just to be, but to, because what does it mean to be a person of love? It means that we are noticing and then taking action on opportunities to be loving. And, I've been thinking a lot about what does that word mean specifically. And I think it's interesting how love is so critical. And most of us know that. Most of us know that in our hearts, if we want to be empathetic leaders, that comes from a place of love. And yet this word can feel so alienating and so confusing in a corporate setting. So today the topic is, what does that word mean really? Does it have a place in the boardroom? Do you need to sacrifice passion in favor of professionalism? And does love do something practically helpful? Does it do something more than just sound nice? I think a lot about and read a lot about and see a lot about the idea of bringing heart into the workplace, especially if you are in a leadership role. But I know that I'm not alone in, thinking whenever things get spiritual, as much as I love that, I always want to anchor it down to practical applications. But what does that look like then? Because we can have the best intentions in the world and still create workplaces that do not feel good to come to by accident if we're not sure what are the practical applications. So that's the goal today. So let's talk about love. First of all, what is love? I think that love means, I know that love means different things to different people. And there are lots and lots of interpretations and manifestations of that word. So when I think about love, especially the kind of love that we're talking about in the workplace, I think it can be helpful to define this concept through defining the contrast. So what isn't love? Because the presence of love can look like romantic feelings. It can look like, loving a certain restaurant, loving your job, loving your kids. We say these words. So the presence of love has a variety of manifestations. But I think that in the contrast is where we find the common denominator. Because in the opposite of love, this is where what we find in the absence of love is fear, suspicion, resentment. So I think that love, for our purposes today, is the opposite of that, the absence of that fear, that resentment, that suspicion. So I think that can be a helpful definition of love for our purposes when we're talking about a divided boardroom in particular. And then, does it have a place in the boardroom? Yes, of course, because I'm sure you can imagine the difference in dialogue, the difference in conversation when you are not approaching from a place of fear and suspicion and resentment. So the next thing that I wanted to cover then is the practical applications of this. What does it mean to bring love into the boardroom? And get your mind out of the gutter. Hi, Karen. Nice to see you too. So what does it mean to bring love into the boardroom then? So one of the things that I've been sharing about lately, especially in the Peace Building Conspirators group, but I wanted to bring the conversation here too, is this idea of collecting evidence. So anytime that we're discussing a divided boardroom or there's division in the workplace, people are just maybe reached an impasse, like you don't want to fire someone, or maybe you can't. But you've just reached this impasse where it's like, but we are not collaborating well. We're not growing how we need to. We're not accomplishing the things that I know we can accomplish together, because we've just reached this, division that is slowing us down and really hindering us. That is because people are experiencing that lack of trust and that resentment. And the reason that we do that is because of specific instances. Maybe there is the presence of hurt. Something hurtful has happened. And then since that moment, more often than not, what I find is people begin collecting evidence that supports the limiting beliefs that they developed in those hurtful moments, in those conversations when they were not heard, when they left feeling overpowered, when they left feeling unappreciated. Those hurtful moments created this limiting belief. I'm not welcome here. My voice doesn't matter here. This is the kind of person who ... or this person thinks X about me. See, it looks like are we back? Okay, I think I'm back. So these limiting beliefs took root in our brains during that hurtful moment. And then what happens is we start collecting evidence that supports that narrative, right? We start noticing examples of you being the kind of person who ... or, well, it makes sense that they would behave that way because, this is how they did it before. So we start collecting evidence that supports that suspicion and that fear and that resentment and holding on to it as proof. And, quite frankly, when I come in to work with clients, I can't think of a time when it hasn't happened that people have used that evidence to kind of pull me aside and be like, well, let me tell you who the problem is. Let me tell you what the problem is here. It's Todd or Becky or whoever. I'm just making up names. And they're like, do you want to see the emails? Let me tell you about this specific situation because I have proof. So one of the things that love can do when we invite love into the situation, into that middle of that division that feels impossible to solve. Oh, I'm sorry. So thank you, Karen, for telling me that there's some type of distortion or echo. I'm sorry about that. That doesn't usually happen. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay. So when we invite love into the middle of that division, what it helps us do is move away from collecting evidence and treating it like proof that supports our anger, our resentment, our fear that we can't grow at this company, or that, this town ain't big enough for the two of us, that narrative that we're sort of telling ourselves. Instead of collecting evidence that supports that story, we start treating evidence like clues. We start becoming like archaeologists or investigators that are at, the scene of where something has happened. And instead of deciding conclusively, this is what this thing means, we use it as clues that help us ask better questions. What might this be pointing at? What might this be pointing at? And we start collecting that evidence in a way that's like pointing at what's the next question I can ask? What's the next helpful thing? And so some of the ways that I like to help my clients, for example, work through this type of division and treat evidence differently is by asking what I like to call curiosity development questions. So in other words, start asking questions that are designed, that are pointing at a solution that's not impossible. So if we are approaching from this place that's like, this person is impossible, either they have to go or I have to go, then you're going to just keep finding evidence that feeds that story. So let's switch into curiosity development mode. What does your scene partner, to use an improvism, what does your teammate see that you don't see? What are they experiencing that you're not experiencing? Because it's very unlikely that someone has just decided to watch the company burn now. And when we move into curiosity development, and when we move, if you're familiar with progressive discipline, I very often encourage people to move from progressive discipline into dynamic accountability. When we make these shifts that happen because we've invited love into the conversation, that's when we start finding possibility. That's when we start unlocking some possibility in the situation. So I like to encourage that type of thinking. What does your scene partner see that you don't see? Why might they be making these kinds of choices? And then ask those brave questions. Ask them with courage and ask them with sincerity. And that's how you'll be able to create an environment that is safe enough for this person to be vulnerable in front of you. So you have to decide, am I committed to making progress in this situation, or do I want to feel powerful, like I have the upper hand? Because you can't come in with both. That won't be a safe enough environment for the vulnerable work that needs to happen. So those are some of the practical things that happen when we invite love into the situation. And then the last question that I wanted to answer this morning, or this afternoon, I guess technically, is, do we have to pick between passion and professionalism? Do we have to pick between those two things? I very often in the work that I do am presented with people who are so passionate. And sometimes that passion shows up in ways that, laws of momentum creates an equal and opposite reaction. And they haven't learned how to channel their perspective. They haven't learned how to shape their perspective into an airfoil that will help them achieve liftoff. So if this terminology is not familiar to you, I will link to a free live training that talks about Newton's laws of motion and how we can apply that during times of division or during times of confrontation. Because the same laws that say for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And then when we think about like emotional momentum, it's like, oh, yes, I see that in my office because I say something, then they say something, and we are just back and forth, stuck at this impossible impasse. But these same laws of motion explain why planes can fly. So it's not just like, lift against weight. Well, I guess we're just stuck forever. There's a way that you shape the object in order for it to be able to use those same exact laws of motion to get liftoff, to be able to fly a metal object up in the air. It's amazing, right? So no, we do not have to pick passion. We don't have to pick one or the other, passion or professionalism. We can't have it. We can't, have both. That's not how it is at all. But we do have to draw a line between understanding passion versus rage, right? So this is where we talk about shaping that airfoil. Again, I'll link to that training if you missed it. But passion plus love, very helpful. Passion plus love helps us find momentum, helps us tap into the why. Some of the most passionate people that can get all up in arms, all bent out of shape during meetings and stuff, some of those people are more deeply connected to the why of the company than other people are. Where we fall into a problem is when that passion isn't tapped into love, but that passion is tapped into resent and hate and fear and suspicion. And when that passion is tapped into suspecting that other people, don't deserve to be here, or other people aren't as smart as me, or other people, whatever, their perspective is invalid because however you would fill that in. This person's perspective isn't as valuable as mine because X. When your passion gets tapped into that energy, friend, you probably have all the best intentions and you are working against yourself. Your airplane is going to stay grounded because your equal and opposite reaction is going to make it so you cannot get any forward momentum. So no, we do not have to pick professionalism or passion, but we do have to make sure that our passion is connected to love instead of resentment, fear, and suspicion. And if oh my gosh, for me, it is totally like my passion is hitched to the wagon of resentment right now. My passion is hitched to the wagon of suspicion that, other people in my team or other leaders of this company or whatever, I feel suspicious of their intentions or of their capability or whatever it is. Then what you've unlocked is not hopelessness. What you've identified is an opportunity for forgiveness work. And, I like to say that forgiveness is the most underutilized F word in confrontation. And, this is the reason why I'm so passionate about doing this work of reconciliation. I think that reconciliation on teams is the most important thing. If you have a creative group of people and you're trying to do something really innovative, there's not a reason to focus, to not be allocating time and resources and mental energy into reconciliation. Because if there's a thing that slows down truly impactful innovation and collaboration, it is distrust and resentment and suspicion. So if you are noticing like you're passionate and you're creative and you care so much, but you just can't get anywhere on your team, you have identified an opportunity for forgiveness and for reconciliation. So, and And if you're like, how do I do that? Again, I'll link to where you can find some of my free trainings, or please reach out. I'd love to talk with you. But I do have free content available online because this work is just too important. It's so important. So I'll link to where you can find some of those free resources afterwards. But I just want to thank you guys for being the passionate people that you are. I hope that this conversation was helpful. I hope you could hear it. I'm not sure what's going on with my sound. So if you are tuning in right now, let me know if you can hear me. Someone before had mentioned that the sound wasn't working right. But if it's not, I will re-record this and I'll just post it as a video. But thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you for being passionate leaders. The world needs leaders that care a whole lot. And they also need leaders who understand how to shape the momentum of a conversation so that we can get liftoff and we don't just get hindered forever with that equal and opposite reaction and then get stuck at a hopeless impasse, feeling like it's us against them. And this is just what real collaboration looks like, you know? So thank you guys again for being here. I appreciate all of you, and I will look through comments and get back to you guys here in a minute. Bye-bye. See you next time.